There's other news on the agenda as well. We don't want to stick to COP all of the time because COVID has reared its ugly head in terms of what other broadcasters have been saying. And this has really raised some eyebrows, particularly with me this week. Let's take a look at what CNN said to the Prime Minister on Tuesday. And we can see that CNN said that case numbers are spiking. That was their charge to the Prime Minister. But it's not just CNN. Yesterday, Sky News said that the coronavirus epidemic is escalating by the day. And yesterday as well, the BBC said that cases are rising in school-aged children. The BBC there on national television saying that cases are rising amongst children. Well, what's actually happening to cases? What's the real picture? What does the data actually tell us? Well, as we can see here, English cases have been falling, not rising, for 2 weeks. And it's not just English cases as a whole, it's also cases amongst under 19-year-olds, school-aged children. They've been falling for 2 weeks now too, as we can see on that graph. Well, it's quite amazing to me that so many established, respected broadcasters can blithely say that cases are spiking, that cases are rising, that cases in children are soaring, when it's totally the opposite of the truth. How on earth are they getting away with this? And why are they saying it? Well, to analyse all of this now, I'm delighted to be joined by our resident COVID expert here on this programme. We're delighted whenever he comes back on to talk through these issues. Christopher Snowdon is Head of Lifestyle Economics at the Institute of Economic Affairs and joins me now. Christopher, why on earth do these big media companies keep getting it so wrong?
It's quite astounding because, as you say, this is not exactly breaking news. I was on your show only last Tuesday talking about how case numbers had been declining for a few days already. It's really gross incompetence, and I don't think you'd see it in a lot of other areas of particularly political journalism. Political journalism is inherently quite trivial. I don't need to tell you that, Tom. But a lot of what political journalists are interested in is things like reshuffles and sackings and Westminster tittle-tattle. And they're interested above all else in the U-turn. They want to see a policy change, because if the policy changes, then political journalists have got something to report. It's not very interesting for them to see the government stick to a policy like getting rid of all COVID restrictions in July, sticking to it, watching the virus gradually tire itself out, and everybody getting back to their normal lives. And so there's this kind of, I guess, an assumption that things are always getting worse, but there's no excuse for it. This data is freely available to anybody who wants to see it online. It has been for well over a year now. And to get it wrong, you know, when case numbers have been falling, as you say, for nearly 2 weeks, to go on and say the exact opposite, it's the equivalent of a sports journalist saying that Ronaldo plays for Chelsea. It's the equivalent of a political journalist thinking that Theresa May is still prime minister. In other words, it wouldn't happen because these people would be derided by the viewing public and by their peers. They get away with it in this instance because it seems to be some kind of assumption. If something involves science or mathematics or statistics, then you can't expect humanities graduates to really get a grip on it. And even Van Tam in that BBC interview you mentioned didn't actually correct the presenter when she quite wrongly said, I think to be fair to her, she was reading out a message from a viewer, but should have put that straight. And why did the viewer think that in the first place? Why was the viewer so misinformed? Well, the public are massively misinformed in this because the media keep telling them things that are not true.
And the media loves to report it every time that cases tick up slightly, but they never report it. They never report it when the cases come down. And I've been trying to provide a bit of a corrective on this programme, but sadly it doesn't seem to have been cutting through that much. We saw from Sky News, from CNN and from the BBC there all this week getting it horrendously wrong, 180 degrees the wrong way. But there are other examples too. Take the Daily Mirror, for example, which has said on Tuesday that 293 deaths happened on Tuesday, which is pretty extraordinary. The Evening Standard said exactly the same thing. The headline was 293 deaths, the highest since February. We can see that on our screens now. But why am I getting annoyed at these organisations reporting what the deaths figures were? Well, when the NHS released those deaths figures, they also released this data issue warning. It said that on Monday, no deaths were reported, so Tuesday's data included deaths from not 1 day, but 2 days. The 293 figure was not deaths from 1 day, so that 1 day did not have the highest number of deaths since February. This was combining multiple days. Now, Chris, how did these two established, respected newspapers get away with those kind of headlines when literally on the data release, the NHS issued a data warning?
Well, it's a good question, isn't it? People wonder whether this is just incompetence or whether it's malicious, deliberate scaremongering. Of course, bad news always sells more than good news. I mean, the rolling average for deaths is 150 a day, roughly speaking. So you can hardly say that's good news anyway. There's really no need to gild the lily in that respect. What you've got there is actually two things. One, the point you mentioned, which right at the top of the website where all this information is made available to people, it specifically says that there's a data issue with this, and read the message, which you've just shown there. But also there's the issue that it was a Tuesday. And there's always far more deaths reported on a Tuesday because the NHS doesn't report very many deaths over a weekend. So there's this backlog, and Tuesday and Wednesday you always see a disproportionately large number of deaths reported. Over the weekend, I think there was 1 day when there was like 13 deaths because nobody reported that. And quite rightly so. You shouldn't be looking at the deaths reported on odd days like this. You want to be looking at the rolling average. But the result of this is various people, the usual suspects on Twitter, will say, oh my word, there's 300 deaths a day. This is absolutely terrible. We're back to February levels of mortality. Not true. And of course, as I say, they're not going to report it when it goes back the other way. And again, the net result is that the public is systematically misinformed about pretty basic statistics, which, as I say, anybody could find. This is not a new issue. I mean, we're nearly 2 years into this pandemic for a startup. The dashboard, the coronavirus dashboard from the government has been available for well over a year. Anybody who's paid any attention to these statistics knows that there's always a much, much greater number of deaths reported on a Tuesday and indeed a Wednesday, and you shouldn't rely on that. You should look at the rolling average. This is really basic stuff.
Yeah, you expect activists on Twitter to get it wrong. I know people have been messaging me saying that, oh, we've got the highest death rate in Europe. Not true. We've got the highest case rate in Europe. Also not true. But for established journalists, newspapers and broadcasting organisations to get it so wrong, and also, crucially, when they're called out on it, fail to apologise, is pretty damning.